Hello, London. We are ready for your vote.
Hello, I'm Stephen Perkins, and this is Douze Points, the Eurovision podcast from the team behind Binge Watch. Today is Monday, the 13th of May. It is the Monday after Eurovision 2024, and we are back here for what should be a final debrief of this year's contest, because it's been a fairly eventful one in just about every conceivable manner. And I'm joined for this one once again by our very lovely producer Liam. Liam, thank you. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Stephen. Yes, it's great to be back. It feels like it's come and gone in such a crazy tornado fashion this year. There's a lot to unpack.
There is a lot to unpack. I mean, it feels like it's been quick. It also feels like it's been one of the longest weeks of my entire life. I feel like I've aged about 15 years in the last 48 hours. But yeah, it definitely hasn't left us with a shortage of things to talk about, has it? I know we did a little kind of gut reaction immediately after the show, and I dare say we may end up sort of slightly retreading a few things we've already said. But I think we can definitely look back on this year's contest and say we had a good winner. In fact, we had a great winner. I mean, I think we had really, up there, comparable to a lot of the greats winner, actually.
Yeah, I think that it was a nice contrast to last year when I think from pretty much the seconds Loreen decided to enter, she was the favourite and only became a bigger and bigger favourite, and then stormed away with it on the night. It was really nice to have a Eurovision where there were genuinely a few contenders there. I mean, if the jury scores had been a little bit different, Ireland would have been much bigger challenges. Switzerland obviously ended up winning it, but were always kind of up there. Croatia ended up sort of switching into sort of pole position the last couple of days. And then, I mean, as we're going to talk about, suddenly Israel seems to get a bit of a resurgence, but, and then you had like France, and I would say even Finland at times were looking like potential challengers, didn't end up being so. It was a really interesting year, and I think there were a lot of factors at play. But ultimately, Switzerland very well deservedly won the show and kind of won it in a bit of a landslide, as it turned out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure I said at the end of last year's that the disappointment of it was that it kind of never really felt like there was that much jeopardy. That it always felt like it was nailed on for Sweden last year, and I think I kind of got my finger curls on the cursed monkey's paw this year with wishing for a bit more jeopardy in it, because I got my jeopardy, and it was jeopardy of a kind I did not want. But yeah, I mean, yeah, landslide for Switzerland, definitely. Very much, jury led. I think we have to say that's fair. They were fifth in the televote, but very very strong favourite with the juries. But it's not like it's one of those things where it wasn't a popular one with the people at home at all. I mean, it did really well. I'm just trying to work out what the margin was. I mean, they were sort of just about 100 points behind Croatia in the televote, which is, in the grand scheme of Eurovision things, it's not a huge gap. So given that we could argue it wasn't a normal year in terms of voting, a lot of us, I think, were kind of maybe trying to focus, pool our efforts in one particular direction in order to avoid a certain outcome, which I dare say may have taken some votes away from Switzerland, perhaps, that may have otherwise been theirs. But yeah, I mean, I think great result for Switzerland. Lovely for them, obviously, because they've got their first win since 1989. I hope I've got that right. I think again a country that really were excited about the prospect of hosting once again, and we may well see, I think, a continuation in our streak of non-capital cities hosting the Eurovision Song Contest, because I believe the capital of Switzerland is Bern. Although I think the capital of Switzerland is defined by various different things, and that it's not like it's the big glamour city, is it? So it might well be that your Genevas and such like will be sort of vying slightly more for the position.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it ends up next year. But I think safe to say Switzerland are sort of well positioned to put on a really good show. So I think there's a general sort of excitement already about what that's going to look like next year. But shout out to Croatia because they were favourites for a large part of the run up to Eurovision, and had they won, it would have been their first win.
Mm,
So I think they're probably going to be feeling a little bit sad today.
yeah.
But they came out strong. It was a great song. I think it really lifted the arena. When at the sort of the time that they performed within the running order, I think was perfect for them.
Mm.
Um, and do you know what? They probably might feel a little bit hard done by this year because it was such a strong field. Um, but they came out swinging. They put in a great show, and next year, if they carry on this momentum, I don't think they'll be that far away from winning soon.
I mean, yeah, they came ever so close, didn't they? That's the main thing. They still got their best result ever at
Yeah.
Eurovision. They'd only ever made it fourth before. So to come, and they've had, I think prior to last year, they had quite a long streak of poor results, non-qualifiers and stuff. And so I think that this is a big shot in the arm for them to go, look, look what we can do. And again,
Mm,
the story they had was incredible. That maybe Lasagna wasn't even on the shortlist to represent them, and was almost on the verge of giving up music, and suddenly got the call saying someone's dropped out. Do you want to come and compete? And then went from that to being you know the favourite for a long time. We were sort
mm,
of keeping an eye on the odds throughout the evening, and Croatia were pretty much the favourites. I think until Switzerland's jury results started coming in, and then Switzerland overtook them. So
mm.
it was also. I'm just going to correct myself here on the Switzerland front. 1988 was their last win. 1989 was their last time hosting. So I
Mm.
do apologise for the
I,
inaccuracy.
I wanted to ask you, Stephen, if you were surprised at how many juries gave 12 points to Switzerland because they really romped home with that.
I think maybe I wasn't expecting them to clean up quite so much. I mean, we had sort of slightly interesting circumstances because I was expecting maybe France to romp home with a lot of them, and then obviously from what we were told, their performance on the jury final wasn't quite as strong, although it didn't seem to hamper them as much as Graham Norton was expecting it to.
Mm,
But yeah, I mean, I definitely. I think I always thought in my head that the biggest obstacle to a Croatia win would be that they wouldn't fare so well with the juries, and that somebody like France or Switzerland would really, really clean up on that front. And
mm,
so the fact that Switzerland ended up being the one that they all kind of coalesced around wasn't a huge surprise. But yeah, we were kind of saying, I think, earlier on in this year's competition that there wasn't a Loreen equivalent that was going to soak up all the jury votes, and actually it turned out there was. We just didn't see it coming.
yeah, and I think in hindsight, you look at the whole performance. I think as we touched on straight after the show on Saturday night, you know, the vocals were brilliant, the
Mm,
performance was brilliant. All of those elements just really come together, and it just looks like a really well polished sort of Eurovision entry. And actually, um, uh, I think they fully deserve to win.
yeah.
Um, I probably would have said the same about Croatia if they won too, to be honest, because I think they were also really, really strong. But Switzerland's really brought the full package, and considering that Nemo didn't have the same level of experience or gravitas to their name as the likes of Loreen, I think they really gave her a run for her money in terms of uh, you know performance and final product.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Switzerland's, that you couldn't really fault them on anything. The song was great, the performance was flawless, the
Mm,
staging, which I kind of when I first saw clips of it, I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. They might have fumbled this one. But when you see it in its entirety, it absolutely works, and
mm,
and it had that lovely kind of showboaty moment at the end where Nemo's kind of standing right on the edge of the kind of Lazy Susan thing, and it's just kind of twirling around at an angle, and the camera's sweeping around, and you see that moment,
yeah,
and you go, oh, this feels like a winner. You
yeah,
just get
yeah,
those
yeah.
vibes off something. So yeah, I mean, fair play to Switzerland. They played their cards incredibly well this year, and I
Mm.
mean they too have had a slight period not so long ago of not doing terribly well at Eurovision, and they've clawed their way back, and good for them. And also, as many people have pointed out, it's ironic that in one of the most divisive Eurovision Song Contests we've had in many, many years, it was won by the world's most famously neutral country.
Yes, fair point. But yeah, well deserved. And I think it just says a lot for because I'm going to preface this by pointing out that us in the UK, generally we're surrounded by this kind of natural uh, cynicism towards Eurovision. And around the politics of it, and the bias that there might be, and that's why we're really, unfairly penalised in the UK, and that's why we never win. The truth is, if you have a good song, you have a great performance, you put in the graft, you do the campaigning, and you really put yourself out there, in the same way that Sam Ryder did a couple of years ago, you've got a chance.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've been so frustrated this morning because I've already seen people responding to the UK's result and being like, nobody likes us, nobody's ever voting for us, and it's like literally 2 years ago we were second, like
Yeah,
literally 2 years ago we topped the
yeah,
jury vote, we were fifth with the televote, like 2 years ago we proved that is not true.
yeah,
The problem has been that we haven't learned the right lessons from that. We've
yeah.
kind of we've sort of we're picking up bits and bits, but we haven't turned the ship around, and that
Mm.
is still very much a work in progress. I mean, we'll come to the UK and the future for the UK presently, but yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, I think ultimately Switzerland just kind of had all of our ideas and a lot better. So
Yeah, I I agree. And yeah, I think the UK, in my opinion, were just a bit disappointing. I think Ollie Alexander was a big name, and I don't think we brought the goods. I don't think we can really complain. I'm actually quite happy that we ended up within the top 20, if I'm honest.
I
So
mean, it's still an improvement on a lot of our recent placings. So
yeah,
it's not quite up there with Lucy Jones, but still a very creditable effort, all things considered. We did, we picked up some jury points. We did not pick up some televote points.
mm,
But and that's interesting because I kind of thought, if anything, it might be the other way around because we were assured this year we were sending a huge international star, Ollie
mm.
Alexander. His fandom will bear us forth, and that the Ollie Alexander hive did not turn up. It appears.
Does this not prove though that like Eurovision viewers are not quite as fickle as we might assume they
Mm.
are? Because you can't just throw a big name on stage and expect votes for it, right?
Well, we've seen that in the past. I mean, we've had like Cascada for Germany and Darude for Finland. Who have all gone to Germany, gone to Eurovision and been like, oh, big name, and then nothing happens for them.
Mm.
You've got to have the entry, you've got to have the song behind it. People will respond to what's happening in front of them rather than just a name. I mean, God forbid we end up going back to the time when we were going, let's send Bonnie Tyler, let's send Engelbert Humperdinck, and thinking that was enough.
Yeah. I remember the big, just the huge like hype machines that surrounded like Engelbert Humperdinq as well at the time because we were just like we were just clutching
I mean,
onto
I remember
anything.
the Believe in Bonnie campaign was quite something. But yeah, I mean, she seemed to have a nice time, bless her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think anyone who was hoping that people who love Total Eclipse of the Heart were going to go, yeah, vote for Bonnie Tyler. I think we're always on a hiding to nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. But as well as just the performances and the songs, I've been really positive about the hosts this year. I think actually they've really raised the bar. What did you think?
Yeah, I think I said in some of the earlier ones that I thought obviously Marlin was seemed a bit nervous in the first few, and was always going to kind of look a little bit stilted next to Pietra, who's got so much experience at Eurovision. But I think to her credit, she knew that and she did not mind. I mean, when we had that bit on the very beginning of Saturday night where they introduced Marlin and she got kind of decent amount of cheers, and they introduced Petra and the crowd went wild. And she was you could sort of see on her face. She was like, I knew this was going to happen. This is fine. I'm very much you are the star, and I'm I'm also here. But I think she did a really good job for the most part. There are a few slips, but it's 4 hours of live television, and as to the best of my knowledge, she doesn't have a huge amount of experience on that front. So I think, and bearing in mind, Eurovision usually has as standard now 3 hosts, and Sweden did it with 2, and very very efficiently. I mean, we kind of saw on a night where there were a lot of uncertain things, uncertain elements, bits that right up until kind of the show was starting, and we weren't sure what was happening. We saw actually during the jury results when Petra went to call in the Finnish jury and did not know the name of the spokesperson because Karja had pulled out so late in the day, and clearly whoever was meant to kind of update Petra's notes hadn't got there yet. And I thought it was a bit uncharitable of Graham Norton to sort of make fun of her for that. But I mean, she was kind of reacting to sort of very last minute changes. But I think to be able to take all that and respond and sort of carry herself with grace and decorum just shows why Petra is she is held as the gold standard at Eurovision these days. There's a reason why when Sweden win Eurovision, people are like, brilliant, it means we'll get Petra back.
Yeah, and I think actually they've really made a case for going back to two hosts. I've always suspected that having three kind of makes it unnecessarily messy. I think it really worked having that sort of two host dynamic throughout the week, not just in the final but in the semi-finals as well. And I do think they've probably set a bit of a standard for others to follow. I think it was really good, and as you say, under the sort of tricky circumstances that the final was kind of shrouded in, I think they did remarkably well.
Yeah, and I mean, I would not have wanted to be in their shoes this year. I mean, to be able to kind of to go out in everything that was happening and have to be the public face of this competition. I mean, it ended up not being an enviable task. I wouldn't be surprised if Petra decides perhaps that she's had 3 Eurovisions now and 3 is plenty and she doesn't want to come back and do a fourth. I would completely understand her decision and I would respect it. And I think Marlin hopefully hasn't been too scarred by the experience and hopefully will come to look back on it as something that was a good for her career. We hope. But I think they both did a really great job of hosting. It's one of the most difficult jobs in telly, I think, because there's so much that can go wrong, and there's so much happening around you.
There was one more difficult job on Saturday night, and that was that of Martin Osterdahl.
Yes.
I forget his title. He's basically the boss of Eurovision, right? And
he's the executive supervisor of the competition, I think, is his official title. I may have that wrong. Something along those lines.
Yeah, so they go to him, don't they? And they for the sort of on-air verification that all the votes have been counted and we're ready to sort of tally them up and announce them. He was not a popular man in the arena.
He was not. No, I mean, I think he has, he has not covered himself in glory this year, and the people in the arena made their feelings known. It was unfortunate that clearly well in advance of all of this happening, they'd pre-recorded that Linda Woodruff skit of how he's a a sex icon and all that sort of stuff, which just landed so flat on the night because every time we went to him, he got booed. I mean, we even saw, I think, given that Netherlands decided they weren't even going to bother turning up to give their jury scores, and Martin Osterdahl had to do it. And I think, as far as I could tell, Nemo didn't even hear the 12 points because the booing in the arena was so loud, and the camera was on Nemo's face, and you just saw them kind of, sort of smiling and kind of, just not really hearing anything that was going on. And it was only after the camera was just about to cut away you kind of saw it registering. But so I think. There's certainly been. I've seen a lot of calls for his resignation this year. Again, I think something we'll get to later on. But not a good year for Martin Osterdahl.
No, and I suspect he's probably jumping on Indeed right now just to sort of see what's happening on the job front because
he's updating his LinkedIn, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So as you say, I think we'll cover that a bit later, more broadly about the issues surrounding the contest. But as far as the results go, what were the big surprises for you? Because we've talked about the favourites that were up there, and I don't think either Switzerland or Croatia winning would have been a surprise to anyone really. Who did better than expected or worse than expected this year?
I mean, I think Ukraine was a big surprise, not because they were always kind of hotly tipped, but I remember when the running order came out and they were in position 2, everyone went, "Oh well, that's it for Ukraine then." And so for them to have put in such a phenomenal performance from second, I know obviously we had the change this year of the voting being open from the very first performance, which may have helped their case rather than hindered it. But I certainly don't think anyone was expecting that enormous surge for Ukraine in the televote, which was so heartening. And I've seen people have cut that clip because you first see the picture announces the massive amount of points that they got, and you hear that initial sort of surge of support for Ukraine in the arena, and then it sort of dims slightly, and then you see the scoreboard being updated, and they overtake Israel, and the place just erupts. And that moment is, I think, the one that the fans are going to kind of look back on as the moment where everyone did a huge collective exhale. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure not, although they would have obviously known the actual outcome and who was winning, the brief moment where you're like, oh, hang on, are we going to be back in the same position again? We're trying to find out who's going to host in Ukraine's position for another year. But I mean, the thing is about Ukraine, you never ever count them out at Eurovision because they're so good at it that they always send something really strong, or 99% of the times anyway. And it was great to see them put in another such strong showing this year, because I think they had sort of fallen out of the conversation a little bit in the run up to the final. So it was great to just see that huge swell of support for what I thought was a really incredible song and performance from them.
Yeah, and I think what would have been particularly headline worthy if Ukraine had snuck the win on Saturday is that they performed in the notorious second position, which no country has ever won. But I do wonder, because I think we have to acknowledge the fact that the kind of the voting changed a little bit this year, in that the lines opened right at the start of the show. So what we saw was there a potential impact there in there being a spike for each country after their performances, rather than having to listen to all 20 odd performances and hoping that if you performed second, you stuck in people's minds. I mean, that must have helped Ukraine, surely.
Definitely, yeah. I think the issue of being on second and being forgotten wasn't so much of a problem this year, but I would be fascinated to know what the what the sort of pattern was like for voting. Were people kind of voting as they were going along? Did a lot of people wait till the end? Because I mean, personally, I did, even though I knew what all the songs were. I waited until maybe it's just the creature of habit in me. I waited until all 25 artists had performed, and then I voted. So
yeah, I imagine it probably encouraged people to cast more than one vote, because there will. I'm making an assumption, but I'm sure there will have been some viewers who would put a cheeky vote in after a particular song if they really liked it, where maybe they wouldn't have done when the phone lines opened right at the end, because they might have forgotten it in favour of a later song that they also enjoyed.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that thing, isn't it? Because otherwise you're kind of getting to the end of 25, 26 songs, and you're trying to remember which ones you liked, and even the ones you liked at the time, someone will say to you, "Oh, what about Spain?" And you'll be like, "Which one was Spain again?" And so this time there was that option. If you got into Spain, you're like, "That was brilliant. Yeah, I could vote for them." So yeah, I mean, I think results-wise, we saw a really solid performance from Luxembourg this year. So I imagine that means they are with us for the foreseeable. They're going to be sticking around because I think there was always that slight sort of it was going to be a test case for them, wasn't it? If they came back and kind of whimpered out in the semi-finals, we may not have seen them try again next year. But I would think qualifying for the finals and then finishing 13th overall, it would definitely be counted as a success for Luxembourg.
Yeah, I mean, I reckon just qualifying for the final probably did it in terms of kind of reassuring them that it was probably sensible to come back. Finishing 13th, I was just the icing on the cake for them, really.
Yeah.
I think it was a great showing, considering they hadn't done this for like 30 years. And I hope they come back. It was a really good performance. I quite enjoyed them.
Yeah, and I mean, we can't not talk about Ireland, can we? I mean, one thing that was pointed out to me on Twitter last night, which I loved, was that Ireland were 6th with the juries, 6th in the televote, and 6th overall. So they were 6-6-6, which just feels perfect for for that performance. So yeah, I mean, I think that's after so many years in the Eurovision wilderness, to kind of come back with such force and do so well is brilliant for Ireland, and I think they're now in the position that we were in 2022, where it's like, okay, you've had 1 year where you've proved you still got it. Now what? Can we build on this? Is this a blip? Are we going to come back stronger? Are we going to learn all the right lessons from this? Because the thing is, your Bambi thugs don't come along very often, and it's probably not something you can really go back to. You can't really you can't capture that moment again. So you can't just think, right, what's the most kind of who's a witch that we can get to represent Ireland again next year. That's not going to work. You've got to think what ignited that excitement about that entry, and try and find that level of excitement in somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's the trap, though, isn't it? Where they've kind of gone a bit rogue definitely against type with Bambi Thug. Absolutely the opposite of what anyone would expect from Ireland. And I worry that now, because of the success that that's had, that they get a bit stuck in this rut of thinking, okay, we just
Yeah.
need to go for something really quirky, really out there, and they sort of lose sight of the real reasons why Bambi Thug did so well.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of saw that a little bit with Finland this year, didn't we? Because obviously, Cha 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 was such a huge moment for them last year, and it was kind of it was the eccentricity of it all that people loved, and so this year they went, right, let's do that and let's dial it up even further, and it ended up not really paying off for them. I mean, they qualified, but they were only 19th. They weren't the sort of the massive televote dominating entry that people thought they might be.
Yeah.
So and again, obviously, other factors in play here, but you can't. There's not a pattern to doing well at Eurovision, because if there was, we'd all be doing it. We'd all know. That part of the delight of it is that there's not one way of getting it right. I mean, the only country that sort of has the only countries that have a particularly strong record of success are countries like Sweden and Italy, where they have a proven tradition of a massive, huge investment in finding the song and the artist in the first place. It's where they have a massive competition that's hugely ingrained in the culture, which is something you can't just create overnight.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a reflection of the music industry as a whole, right? Because you've got these sort of pop sort of manufacturing machines that you associate with the likes of Simon Cowell, who pump a lot of money into the R&D, and they create acts that they kind of know fit a certain formula, and they're it's all quite safe, and you can kind of guarantee a certain degree of success. Some of them will do sensationally well, but they'll all do reasonably well. And then you've got like these other labels who might be a little bit more kind of qualitative in their approach, and just go with people who sort of hit the right notes, and hope that they resonate. And we've seen both types of approaches in how countries select their Eurovision acts, and I think that we can sometimes forget that Eurovision is actually quite an accurate reflection of these kind of broader cultural consumption habits. Sometimes we think we have a safe bet, and they just don't work. Sometimes we throw something completely left field into the mix, and they're an absolute smash. It's so subjective, and that there might be certain boxes that you can tick, but ultimately it's about having the right act, singing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's worth looking at the semi-finals, and who did well and who sort of fell by the wayside. No great surprises. I think that Croatia won the first semi-final and Israel won the second one. Iceland unfortunately got the booby prize first time in the first semi-final rather. Just 3 points for Hera Björk, and then Malta the lowest in semi-final 2, which I was slightly surprised by, because I know a lot of people enjoyed that one, but I think Malta perhaps suffered from being, as Graham Norton pointed out, we had a lot of those entries of energetic woman dancing with lots of dancers around her, and fatigue is going to take a few people out in that category. So I think maybe that's what did for Malta this time. And the two countries who finished 11th and therefore were just shy of qualifying, Australia in semi-final 1 and Czechia in semi-final 2.
Yeah, I mean, semi-final one I thought was very difficult to qualify from because you had so many of the big hitters this year in that semi-final. But I think the big story from that is Australia not making the cut, and Australia have, I guess you could say, a slightly bigger investment in sort of. And there's certainly a much bigger effort required for Australia to
Mm.
enter Eurovision than perhaps other countries. Um, Purely, geographically. And
I imagine financially as well.
yeah. So I just wonder if it's becoming just unviable for them to continue in Eurovision.
Yeah, I think we were sort of kept waiting for a long time this time round to see how they would if they would be back this year, and I don't know what the deal was struck in terms of whether it was just for this year and then they'd see. But yeah, I imagine there may be some conversations being had about if they want to carry on at Eurovision. Could sort of understand if after this one they decide actually, do you know what, we've had a good run, we're gonna drop back out now. I think the EBU might want to keep them around because they have had the number of countries taking part has been slipping over the last few years, and they probably don't want to keep losing countries, so they probably might be slightly more invested in keeping Australia around. But yeah,
Will
I imagine that's not going to be an answer we'll get anytime soon.
will we see the Big Five become the Big Six? Maybe.
Yeah, well, we may have to. I think. Uh, so I'm just picturing the idea of Australia becoming in the Big Six, which which yeah, I think whatever criticisms we've had so far would be amplified if that were to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so should we talk about the UK and what's next for us?
It feels like we have to, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at it, I'm still not convinced that staging did us many favors. To be honest, I think it was quite confusing for a lot of people. I think
Mm.
trying to figure out exactly, it was a sort of grimy locker shower room in space for some reason. I was sort of watching it going, I don't know what this has to do with this song particularly. I know that obviously the song is
Yeah.
busy and there's a lot of jerky camera movements, people being thrown around, but I I don't think it quite worked at home. I'm
No.
sure one of the things where it might have worked quite well in the arena, but for the viewers at home, I think it just felt. I've seen people saying that if you try and do a music video on the stage at Eurovision, it never really works, and I think that may have been the problem here.
Mm. I I agree. I mean, I'm going to be really harsh here though as well, and say I think one of the main problems was just the vocals. I
Mm,
mean, and I say that knowing Ollie Alexander is a really established artist. He's got a global reputation, a huge amount of success, but he didn't really bring that to the Eurovision stage, in my opinion.
I think ultimately, where one of the problems that we have is that if you're going to put that level of effort into the staging, you need a great song and a great performance to back it up. Which
Mm.
I think the song was okay, the vocals were, eh. And so I think people who are watching it are going to be kind of looking at going, well, why was your attention not on the song and the vocals? Why was all your
Mm.
attention on doing this huge production? Um, so it's
Yeah.
it's tricky to because sometimes you don't know what's going to work and what isn't until you actually get into the arena, and by then it's too late to make any major changes. I like that we really went for it with the staging, but I remember when we first saw it, I said I worried it was a bit overcooked, and I think it probably was a bit overcooked.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think Ollie has such a huge profile. I think you're right. We didn't need to put as much into the staging. And yeah, I think it was just a bit of a letdown. And I'm really not surprised that he got nothing from the audience votes because at the
yeah.
end of the day, you have to ask, you know, would he have been enough people's favourite song or
Mm.
encouraged enough people to vote that the UK would have been the top 10 in any country, and I don't think we would have been.
No, I agree. There wasn't enough there. I don't think. I mean, it's interesting because this was always going to be kind of a test case for the UK. Is it worth sending a big artist? I think the take home from this is going to be that we probably won't be sending a big artist again for quite some time, because I don't think anyone with any kind of career that's worth protecting is going to look at what happened to Ollie Alexander and going, yeah, sign me up for that. And I think one thing we'll get to in a moment as well is that I think this may not only be the UK having a problem about after this year of who's going to actually want to represent them, but yeah, I think we may well be back to trying to find someone of the Sam Ryder kind of quality, where you've got an unknown artist, but someone with innate star quality that can transcend the lack of name recognition.
I agree. I also think kind of the proof is in the pudding a little bit, and I think if Ollie can kind of come out the other side unscathed and his career isn't affected, it might incentivize other established stars to think, actually, do you know what? I've got an idea. Let's have some fun. I'll do Eurovision. Whether that's the approach we want to take in terms of our act selection is another question. But, I don't think this necessarily rules out other established artists from competing for us.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely not going to be any easier to persuade them after this. I don't think.
No.
I think the BBC will have a bit of a job on their hands trying to find next year's representative, because they're not going to be getting all of these big names that people keep throwing around every year that might want to do it for us. I don't think any of them are going to be beating a path to their door. But
Yeah.
that's okay. We don't you don't need a big name. I mean,
No.
you can manage without a big name. We've proven that in the past. But
Yeah, I mean, Sam Ryder wasn't a big name until
he wasn't.
Eurovision.
He had a big TikTok following, but that in itself wasn't proof of anything that was going to actually resonate at Eurovision. But he had a good song. He was an amazing performer. He had star quality. He was a really likable guy.
Yeah.
And that's the alchemy that you need, and it's that sort of thing that you kind of find out once you're on the journey.
Yeah, agree.
So moving on then, I mean, I think this is the point where we have to talk about what's next for Eurovision, because obviously this year has not been a banner year for the contest. I think it's fair to say it has attracted a fair amount of negative press, and it has, I think, as far as I can tell, been a fairly unpleasant experience for a lot of the people who are actually participating in it. So that's an issue for Eurovision. I think that we've had the phone vote become this kind of political tool, which is exactly what they always say they don't want. It's hard to say exactly what impact the massive kind of Vote Israel online campaign had, but it's very hard to imagine that they would have been second in the televote without it. It was whatever your personal points on that song, I don't think it was a second place song on its own merits. We've seen contestants reporting harassment backstage from the Israeli delegation. We know that Bambi Thug went to the EBU to make a complaint about the Israeli broadcasters' treatment of them, which apparently was deemed to be breaking the rules, but then also in a different account was deemed not to be breaking the rules. And it just feels like there's been so much mixed messaging, that we know that there was a fan in the arena who had the non-binary flag confiscated for being political, and I think possibly the bit that's going to have a resonate for quite a while is that the EBU has undoubtedly angered the Netherlands, who I gather are kind of they're up there quite close to the Big Five in terms of their contribution to the budget, and that is not something that's going to be smoothed over easily with that disqualification this year. So
I mean, I'm gonna just throw this out there and say that the problem that the EBU have is that they obviously don't want to get embroiled in politics, but in being so out there in their reluctance to get involved in politics, they've put themselves in the middle of all of these conversations, and whether that's through deliberate choices or whether that's just because the organisers are just making very bad decisions, I don't know. But in terms of, to me, there's a hypocrisy in disqualifying a country on the basis that they were, by all accounts, verbally abusive, which or threatening. And don't quote me on that. I don't know the details, but that's what I've heard. And yet they allow another country to participate who, by all accounts, are committing genocide, There's a bit of a mismatch there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think even if you're just taking the actual rules as they're applying them to the competition, that there was abusive behaviour being taking place from the Israeli delegation, which was went unchecked basically. So it's not the rules aren't being applied evenly across the board, and
No.
essentially the thing you have to remember is that doing nothing is in itself, or can be a political statement. If you decide that you're going to ignore something, that is a political statement. And it does appear as though Israel felt comfortable this year that they could do whatever they liked and get away with it. That one of Eden Golan's team was harassing other members of the delegation, and that member of the team was removed from the arena, but there were no consequences for Israel as a delegation. And it's incredibly disappointing that this is what we ended up with, because I think there was just every new report of something happening was just kind of, you really think that things have got as bad as they're going to get, and then suddenly another news story breaks and it's something equally depressing that just makes you wonder who the heck is in charge of this thing and how they've messed it up so badly.
Yeah, and clearly, with the fact that jurors were pulling out, last minute, there was obviously a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, and there was a lot of just volatility there. But I also think, regardless of anyone's political opinions listening to this podcast or watching Eurovision, regardless of what side of the fence you're on with any of this, I think it's quite clear, and we can all agree, that the rules are not clear enough.
Yeah.
They're allowing too much discretion. Then they're far too inconsistent to be enforced with any sort of reliability or I think respect anymore from viewers. And it's not just this year. You compare. The question has to be asked. Why ban Russia in 2022 if you're not then going to ban Israel in 2024? Why are they different? What's the reasons for that? And I just think the EBU need to acknowledge that actually sometimes there are macro political factors at play that can't just be ignored. They have to be acknowledged and somehow accounted for in the rules in terms of who is eligible and who is not.
Yeah. And I think what's worrying about this is the fact that we did not end up with an Israeli victory in the end. Might be seen as a victory. It might be seen as disaster averted. They haven't got to worry about the PR nightmare of Tel Aviv 2025 or whatever. But the fact remains, this was an incredibly narrow escape for the competition from an absolutely disastrous outcome. And they've lost control of the narrative. They've lost control of the room. They've lost control of the. They've lost support from the fans. We've said before that we imagine that Martin Österdahl will not be remaining in the competition, but I don't think that's enough. He may be a significant part of the problem. He's not the problem all by himself. There's very clearly, problems with the top brass going a lot further up the chain than him, and there needs to be meaningful change with this competition. And what frustrates me slightly is I don't know what capacity there is for fans to hold the EBU as account, because we aren't the members. The broadcasters are the members. And is there this possibility that one or two kind of heads will roll, and then that will be deemed to have been taking care of the problem, where what needs to happen is almost kind of rebuild this competition from the ground up and look at all the ways in which it went wrong this year. And I think we need to as well factor in the contestants' well-being and safeguarding, because we've had contestants like May Muller and Lazara from last year who've both sort of spoken out about the terrible impact the contest had on their mental health, and I can only imagine there's a lot of contestants from this year who will be feeling much the same way, that they weren't looked after by Eurovision, that they were left in a hostile environment to defend for themselves. I mean, I think what was interesting is that you kind of saw on Saturday night how popular Marina Sati from Greece was, and I'm sure that is what was in part because reports are that she was very, very active in standing up for people when they were being harassed backstage. So, there's if you want this to be this huge kind of world level competition with amazing artists coming, they're not going to turn up if that's how they're going to be treated when they get there. And and I think it might not just be the UK that's going to have trouble trying to find good acts to represent them next year, because people, quite rightly, I think, are going to look at what happened this year and be like, well, I don't want to put myself through that. Why on earth would I want to put myself through that?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of damage control that needs to be done here, and there's a big PR piece so the Eurovision can establish themselves as credible and as you say, like a competition that people even want to be part of. But it is wider than that. You know, it's they really have to take a step back at this point and think about um, what actually went wrong. How was this allowed to go wrong? Because you know, scapegoating a couple of people at the top and firing them, it doesn't fix the problems. So there is a lot of work to be done, and whether that can be fixed in 1 year, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I think we just have to see that process being carried out at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the competition has to be very careful about at this point is that they may have, averted disaster in the moment. What they can't afford to do is just kick it down the road for a bit. If we end up in the exact same position again next year with all of these problems still there, then you can maybe have 1 year where all of this happens and your reputation is significantly impacted, and you can survive that. If it happens, if it becomes the new normal, then that is something that the competition potentially doesn't recover from. So, yeah, they I think I wish I could say I had full confidence that appropriate measures will be taken. I don't know if I do, but we will have to wait and see what happens. And I think I'm certainly thinking about my own relationship to this contest now, and how much effort and attention I want to devote to it in future if this is the end result.
Yeah, and I hope that we can still be sitting here in a year's time, following Switzerland, and have a very different tone to end the end the podcast on.
It would be
But
nice,
I
wouldn't it?
think it's a big thing right now, and we all want Eurovision to continue and to get bigger and better. And I think it's time now that the fans really rally round together and kind of help to drive that change.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's heartening is I've seen a lot of the sort of the big name fan sites are calling for meaningful change,
Hmm.
and then that's not going to go away in in the next 2-3 days. They're going to be keeping that fight up, and I think whether we have the power to enact change is another matter, but hopefully we can at least keep the pressure on, and we will hopefully see some responsibility and some accountability being taken for everything that's happened this year and how things were allowed to go so badly wrong in the first place.
Hmm.
Which feels like a very somber note to end this podcast on, and I feel a bit sad that that's where we're going. But I think I think we've kind of said everything that we were planning to say, haven't we?
I think so, and we love Eurovision, and I think we're going
Yeah.
to echo a lot of the sentiments of many people who watched on Saturday. So roll on Switzerland. Let's get these positive, like meaningful changes in place, and let's make it an event that we can all be proud to cover, to participate in, and to enjoy watching.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. I want Eurovision to be a joyous occasion. This year's wasn't. I don't mind it being that, and I don't want next year's to be the same experience again. I don't think any of us do.
Hmm.
So as far as this podcast goes, we are going to have a little break now because we've been putting out new episodes weekly since January. Liam and I are both quite tired. We'd like to have a little rest, recharge our batteries, and so we're going to be taking a little hiatus for probably a couple of months. Given that there's not going to be a lot of Eurovision news in the meantime. But obviously, if anything huge breaking news does happen, we will pop back up, I'm sure. But yeah, we're going to take a little break, go on hiatus for a bit. As I said, we're going to reflect very slightly on what we want to do in the future, how we see ourselves continuing to engage with this contest if meaningful change doesn't happen. But in the meantime, I would just say thank you very much to everyone who has listened to us over the last few months. We know that there are a lot of Eurovision podcasts all vying for your attention, and we don't take it for granted by any means that some of you have made time and space for us in your lives, and that's really lovely, and we really appreciate it. We hope that in the event that we come back and we resurface, that you'll join us and you'll be here again. We will announce obviously any news on our social channels with new episodes, and obviously if you hit subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, you will get new episodes as and when they drop. So yes, I think it only remains for me to say thank you, Liam, for joining us on this podcast. It's been lovely
Always
to
a
have you
pleasure.
as always, and thank you for providing lots of really good talking points And thank you again to everyone who's listened. We really, really appreciate your support, and we hope to see you again soon. Until next time, good night, Europe, and good morning, Australia.